Finley to throw. Over the middle, intercepted. Wolford again. Wolford the other way at the 30, the 40. Wolford to midfield. Miles Wolford with the pick. The Heels on the doorstep of an enormous victory. Williams is the running back next to Howe. Play action. Howe will now lob it down the near side. Newsome with a man all over him. Pins the ball against the back of the defender and brings it in. Heels can get a first down at the 3. Howe, pump fake to the right. Now he's going to run to the left. Howe left the 5. Takes the shot. Pinballing off the Canes for the touchdown. Howe showing the toughness for 6. Orioles down 4, 35-31. May has the shotgun snap. Pressure coming. Rolls to the right. Throws to the end zone. Touchdown! Touchdown, Antoine Green! 16 seconds to go. No flag. Snapping it off the 8-yard line. May pulls it, tries to roll it apart. Now he's going to throw it and score! Christian May throws it to Payton in the end zone for the touchdown. They are throwing this lane for the left-handed. Was rolling out on the run and threw it left-handed. Nard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio, he's going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog podcast. It's your host, Anthony Pagnotta, here with you guys as always, coming at you live on a Saturday night as we get closer and closer to the start of fall camp for the Tar Heels this upcoming season. It will be just 5 days from now when the Tar Heels will take the field for the first time in preparation of getting ready for the opener in Dublin against the TCU Horned Frogs. And so tonight we're here to tell you about the linebackers for this upcoming season, a talented group, no doubt about it, for this year. Definitely a group that I think, when you look at, you wonder how they're going to be able to adjust to their new roles, taking over for the group that was here last year. But I think this is one of those groups that you probably have some belief in going into this season. And whether that's because of what Stephen Belichick did last year, whether that's because of these guys as a whole, one way or another, it's probably a room that you don't feel too bad about despite all the turnover that Carolina has going into this year. But did want to start out this edition of the podcast, and I didn't even put it in the rundown, just completely blanked on it. But I got a text right as we were in the intro there, and I thought, this was the perfect way to begin. So shout out to Josh. Lee Pace, the Tar Heels sideline reporter who has been covering Carolina football for 35 years. He announced earlier this week that he is going to step away and or 22 years on the sidelines. After 22 years and 262 games, he is going to step away from his role with the Tar Heels Sports Network. He is still going to put out his centennial edition of Football in a Forest. He said that he is going to knock that out by 2027. But as of right now, he is going to be focusing on retirement, and he's going to be out on the golf course a lot during this upcoming season. Lee, was on here quite a few times back in the early days of the podcast, always was incredibly gracious with this time. And I just thought was excellent as the sideline reporter for the Tar Heels, had the right demeanor for those types of situations where it just felt like he was a very easy guy to talk to, whether you were down 30 or you were up 30. And it feels like he had to handle a majority of different coaches, from Larry Fedora to Mac Brown to even Bill Belichick this past year. And so just wanted to shout out Lee and what an amazing job he did in his role for Tar Heel football. Got the Football in a Forest book. It's one of my favorites that I have. And it's a great look back into the history of Carolina football. There's no one that knows more about the history of Carolina football than Lee Pace. And so Wishing him the best in retirement, and certainly a guy that we're going to miss on the sidelines here this upcoming season.
Yeah, you knew that he was getting up there in age, but kind of was just someone that I thought was going to do this until he couldn't do it any longer, considering how long he's been doing it. You're talking about a first-class man that loves Carolina football, and that comes across in his writing. It comes across in the work that he did working with Jones and Woody Durham and all those guys over the years on the Tar Heel Sports Network. And, while he's not a player, he's a central figure you think about with the program. Because, as you mentioned, no one knows the ins and outs and the history of this program, the history of Keenan Saden, which we're going to celebrate all year long, quite like Lee Pace. And so it was a tweet that when I saw it go up the other day, just kind of caught me off guard, kind of surprised me a little bit, just because I always thought that as long as Carolina was playing football, Lee Pace was going to be there to cover it. So it'll definitely be a different tune this year on those broadcasts. But knowing the professional that Jones is, I know that he'll be able to handle it well. I am myself looking forward to buying the Centennial version of Football in the Forest. Can't wait to get that. I bought the first edition, quite like you, and I'm happy for him because, as you mentioned, he's going to spend a lot of time on the golf course. I imagine him and Roy Williams will get quite familiar with Pinehurst number 2 and some other golf courses in the local area in the next couple of years. And I can't think of a guy more deserving than Lee Pace to go off into a happy retirement, and wishing him the best of luck.
Yeah, and now Carolina got to find a new sideline person. I mean, intrigued to see where they go with that. Maybe they sort of hinted at it on one of the recent editions of R.L. Bynum's new podcast. He had Bryn Renner on and said sideline reporter. So I do wonder if that is going to be maybe the new role that Bryn's going to be in. The ultimate solution is we're just going to have to reach out to Bryn and get him on the podcast and ask him what his role is going to be for this upcoming season. I would hate to lose him from the booth, but maybe that is the route that they end up going. But yeah, it's going to be really tough to replace just what Lee Pace brought to the sidelines, his knowledge of the sport. Anytime during the broadcast that you needed a historical nugget, Lee was there to be able to give it to you. And so that is certainly going to be a loss for Carolina. Was expecting to see him over there in Dublin, at least on the sidelines, with the crew, not us going over there personally, but was expecting to see him there with that group. But wishing him the best, man. It's always difficult to make those types of decisions about when it is time to step away. But, he's going to be listening to Tar Heel football, as he said, in his AirPods while he's out there on the golf course. And hopefully this upcoming season, Carolina can give him something to cheer about. And one of the rooms that hopes to do that is the linebacker room. It's going to be one of the keys for Carolina to be able to succeed on the defensive side of the football this upcoming season. And they had to replace both starters from a year ago. Andrew Simpson gone due to graduation. Kamori House gone in the transfer portal. And look, these were guys that at moments during last year, they certainly had some areas that they looked good in and helped Carolina, especially out of the gate. I thought this unit, for the most part, played pretty well early in the season. But as the season went along, it was a group that really got worn down. You could see some of the weaknesses being exposed. And then you got to the end of the season for Kamori House, where it just seemed like he wasn't even bought in to playing week to week. And so I think Carolina, it's probably what's best for them. I wouldn't have hated another year of Andrew Simpson in the system at Carolina, but you got to move on because he ends up graduating. I do think that this year's group, though, they do a pretty good job of pivoting through the transfer portal, through the high school ranks, and have put together a pretty talented group that'll be taking the field once they get to Dublin for the first game of the year.
Really feel good about the top two guys that we'll talk about in this room. Both of them coming to the program via the portal. And I think as long as they can stay healthy, I think they are primed to be really two productive backers for Carolina. And this is a group, or this is a position that I'm still wanting us to get back to the level of linebacker play we got spoiled by as young Carolina fans. Like when we first got involved with the program, we were watching the Bruce Carters, the Quan Sturdivants, the Kevin Riddicks of the world, guys that would go on to play and have careers in the NFL. It feels like there's been glimpses where Carolina's gotten close to that, and there have been certain years where Carolina has really struggled at that position. I think one thing that we consistently struggle with is linebackers that can't cover and not being able to hide that. That was a big issue for Mac Brown during his second stint with the program. I feel really good about the one deep. I feel really good about the starters and what they can be, what I think they will be. If you watch ACC football like we do, the name Darren McDonald will ring a bell. He's been a productive player in this conference before. It's just if those guys were to go down, what do you have behind them is, I think, a real big question mark. It's a real big unknown. But we're going to learn more and more about this group as the season does move along, because I do think Belichick will be looking to get some guys in, try to get some guys some more playing time, just so this time next year maybe he doesn't have as inexperienced a room with as many question marks that maybe exists in the depth position of this linebacking room.
Yeah, I mean, you say we got to get back to Quan Sturdivant, Bruce Carter. I think as long as you could get back to even what, Cedric Gray and some of those guys, Power Eccles was providing the room, you would feel pretty good about where Carolina is at. Defensive line-wise, we talked about it. There are some guys that you feel really good about in that defensive line room. And if you could get the play that you got from a guy now in Cedric Gray, who's a starter in the NFL and was one of the better tacklers in all of the league a year ago. I thought, there were a lot of guys that really, during Mac Brown's era in particular, really got overshined by the fact that the defense was not nearly as good as we thought they were going to be. And if they were on defenses that were even solid, even average defenses, they probably would have been considered stars and could have gone even higher in some of these drafts. I mean, yeah, you mentioned it. Some of these guys not great in coverage, but I do think for the most part, you look at what they're able to bring as run defenders, feel pretty good about it. This year's group, it's going to be a little bit different in terms of the guys that they have in this room, but I think most people feel pretty excited about where this room is at coming into this year. You start with Payton Sealman, go with another Richmond transfer, and I think you got to start with him because he's the guy that we heard the most buzz about during the spring. Again, very limited buzz with all of these position rooms because they just didn't get looks at these guys in 11-on-11 or 7-on-7 situations. But Payton Sealman was a guy that when they did talk about what was going on in the spring, and some of the sources around the program were talking about him, they said that even though he was undersized, he's definitely a guy that is living up to the billing. He's making plays for Carolina, and that's what you want to see. Last year in 12 games for Richmond, started all 12 of them, had 120 total tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, 9 total quarterback pressures, 2 interceptions, 4 pass breakups, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery. So pretty much as well-rounded of a player as you are going to see. First team All-Patriot League honors a year ago. And really what you're looking for, for him to be is really just a tackle machine, I think, for Carolina. A guy that's going to show up in a lot of these games and be able to shut down the run if it gets past that first level. You're hoping that first level can provide the resistance that it needs to. But if it doesn't, you want to have guys that are shorthanded tacklers, where I felt like at times last year didn't necessarily have that. And that was what hurt you in some of these big games that Carolina played, where they allowed a decent amount of rushing yards. This year feels a little bit different, and hopefully that's what Sealman is going to be able to bring. But at the same time, he is a guy that covers probably better than anybody on last year's roster at the linebacker position covered. In the games that he played last year, 38 targets, 29 of those were caught for just 201 yards and no touchdowns. And you may be saying, well, 201 yards, that's still a decently significant amount of yards on 29 catches. Even still, I mean, Carolina in past years has really been torn up in the middle of the field. Teams have taken advantage of them there, whether it's with slot receivers or, tight ends. They've really found a way to be able to take advantage of Carolina in those most important games that Carolina plays. Doesn't feel like that's necessarily going to be the case this year from Payton Sealman. Now, there is going to be the fact of him having to translate from the FCS level. Does those numbers, do they carry over with him to this level? But I feel pretty confident about him going in. I thought it was the biggest pickup that Carolina made on the defensive side of the ball out of the transfer portal. And it's one of the guys I feel most confident about on this defense going into this season.
Yeah, despite him maybe being undersized in terms of, because he's 6'1", 225, he kind of feels like a Bill Belichick kind of linebacker, like just a tackle machine, sideline to sideline, but can play the run, can play the pass. If you need him to blitz, it might not be a strength of his, but like is capable of doing that as well. And I think as long as he makes the transition from, the Patriot level of football up to the ACC and the Power 4 conference level, I think you're going to see that production carry over. And I think he'll be, a guy whenever we're recapping these games on Mondays during the season, we'll be talking about him leading what we think are going to be pretty consistent defensive efforts on a week in, week out basis. And if this front four can really take a step, if Carolina can get really good in the trenches, like we talked about when we previewed that side of the ball, then there's really no limit on what his potential can be, and how impactful he can be on this defense. And so really, really excited. I hope that we can hear some stuff about him in fall camp. I hope that whenever there's media access, this is a guy that they're talking about, at least not when Inside Carolina and Andrew Jones are writing. Hopefully those guys are writing about this guy, because I'd have to say, outside of what the quarterback position will look like when they take the field, of all the newcomers, of all the transfers, he's the guy I'll be keeping my eye on the most when we get to that opener against TCU, because you start out with a power conference opponent. We'll be able to kind of learn right away, if he's ready for this level, and if not, the areas he's going to have to improve. But I think as long as he can handle the speed and the physicality that he'll see at a week in, week out basis, I think the production that you saw at Richmond, I think that'll carry over in a big way here for Carolina.
Yeah, the speed, I think, is going to be the biggest thing that you're going to be maybe a little bit concerned about coming into that opener against CCU, because guys at the FCS level just aren't nearly as fast. Yeah, physicality, I think, is something that you worry about a little bit too. But the thing that you're hoping is that the guys on that first level of the defense really don't allow those offensive linemen to climb to that second level consistently and get hats on him. You want him to be freed up to be able to make tackles. And I think that's going to be his main role. You talked about him being a guy that Carolina could use in blitz situations. I think that's your other linebacker. I think that's Derek McDonald, a former defensive lineman that you're probably looking at and saying, we're going to utilize you more in that role. So for Payton Sealman, I think it's going to be, hey, man, just find a way to make the tackles that we need you to make in the run game. And then can you hold up when we drop you into coverage? That's the main thing that we're looking for. Because Derek McDonald, that's definitely not his strength, being a former defensive lineman. Can you find a way to hold up in that area and not have us getting beat week to week consistently in the middle of the field? If you can do that, then I think you feel pretty good about where this linebacking core is at coming into this year. Sealman is a guy that I think, if the season, shapes up the way that it does, and he puts up even remotely similar numbers, doesn't even have to be 120 total tackles. Let's say he's somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 tackles. Is this a guy that can be an all ACC honorable mention at the end of the year? I think that'd be a really great starting point for Carolina defensively if you can get those types of numbers from him. I feel confident that he can do it. I think the transition from the FCS level, you're going to get a guy that's extremely hungry. That's the thing about going and getting guys from these lower levels, is that these are going to be guys that are wanting to prove themselves, that they can play on this level and continue to build on what is a solid start to his career. I think he's going to be able to do that in this season for Carolina. And the good news is you get him for a couple of seasons at least. So it's not just 1 year in the system. It's going to be a couple of years that you get to build him up. I think this year, though, out of the gate, he still could be pretty solid for Carolina as a starter. And I think that's really what they're looking for at that position this year. Just, can you be a little bit better than what we saw a year ago? Derek McDonald is the guy that should be beside him. 2025 cut short due to a hip injury, but he played a major role for the Syracuse Orange in the previous 3 seasons. So far in his career, he's collected 173 total tackles, 7 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks, and an interception, along with 3 pass deflections. The thing is that he has to prove that he can be a reliable starter for Carolina after he lost his starting job late in 2024 and did not start a game for Syracuse last year. So fell out of favor there with Fran Brown and his staff. Is he able to sort of get himself back to where he needs to be as a starter quality player in this league? You go back to the last year that he was at full strength. That would be 2023. He finished with 67 total tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, 23 total quarterback pressures, and a pass deflection in 953 snaps. I think that's the type of year that you're looking for him to have at linebacker. I think the fact that he is coming from the ACC, has had some success here, is something that you like. The fact that he sort of fell out of favor in Syracuse late in the 2024 season and didn't regain that last offseason before he eventually gets injured, probably the things that concern you about him going into this year.
Well, you hope that he's showing up here motivated and really just pissed off to prove Syracuse that they made the wrong decision, taking that starting spot away from him. It felt like, 2 things I think led him to Carolina, why he's kind of being placed in this role. I think, one, the familiarity with the conference, just knowing what it takes to play in this league on a down-in, down-out basis probably attracted him to Belichick, Lombardi, and Carolina's coaching staff. And then, I mean, you are talking about the experience, having played 41 games so far at the collegiate level. So he's been around the block. There aren't going to be many situations that he hasn't already seen, that he hasn't already prepared for. I think, for a room that you've brought some younger guys in as well. This could be a guy that could really lead that room by example in terms of how to prepare off the field to get ready to do your job on the field on Saturday. So look, we've seen him. This name very familiar because we have seen Syracuse at random times kind of pop up and play meaningful football here in the last handful of years within this conference, and we've seen this guy make plays on Saturdays. And if Sealman does what we just talked about him doing, and Derek McDonald can get back to the form that he had back in 2023, then you feel really, really good about what those 2 guys offer you, in terms of a 1-2 punch at that linebacker spot. And look, we felt the same way a year ago with Simpson and Kamori House. Ultimately, that did not pan out to the fullest extent with some of the issues down the stretch, but Carolina's putting a lot into these 2 transfers, and if they hit in ways that those 2 guys do not, I do think we could see a step forward for Carolina's defense, which obviously was the strength last year under Stephen Belichick.
Yeah, I mean, believe it or not, even with Sealman coming from the FCS level, I think the bigger concern is probably with Derek McDonald. But the thing is that if you get what you got in 2023, I mean, if you can get what we think you're going to get from Sealman, and then you put what McDonald did in 2023 alongside of that, Carolina is going to be perfectly fine at the linebacker spot. There's really nothing that you have to worry about at that level. Now, I mean, I think that that's going to be something that we're going to have to wait and see on. I do think that there is going to be, a little bit of rotation here. We'll talk about Jonathan Agamadu here in a second, and that's a guy that could capitalize if Derek McDonald does struggle. But yeah, I mean, you're already one thing that you are seeing is that there is some leadership qualities that he's bringing. He's a guy that's been around college football for a long time now. I mean, this is either his 5th or 6th year at the college level. So he's been here for a while. He knows what it takes to go through camps like this. He's going to be a guy that guys can turn to here during training camp and really rely upon to get them through what's going to be a really difficult grind. And you could tell that he's already showing up in that area. This was one of the guys that got to go overseas to Dublin back during the summer. And so if he's doing that, that shows you that he's already becoming a leader on this team. He's doing everything the staff is wanting to see from him to be able to make that trip over there. They're not just going to hand that to you. That's one thing that we've learned with this staff. Is that, even though the team wasn't very disciplined a year ago in terms of the number of penalties and what we saw on game day, feels like when it comes to them, making sure that guys are doing the right things, going through workouts the way that they need to, and showing certain leadership qualities to be able to do things like going overseas to Dublin to promote the game, standing up and doing the interviews that you get to do during the spring and the fall. I think that's certainly something that Carolina, that Bill Belichick and his staff are making sure these guys are doing the right way. And so I would think that Derek McDonald has emerged as one of those guys that is a leader. Hopefully he's a guy that's emerged and looked the part out there on the field, coming back from the injury and looking the part of a starter that can do some similar things to what he did earlier in his career. And if he can prove that he's able to do that, then I think Carolina could have a really good starting two at the linebacker position for this season. I don't think it's going to be one of those ones that's going to be incredibly memorable. It's not going to be two guys that are going to land on the all-ACC teams at the end of the year. But as long as these two guys are solid, I think that would be a step in the right direction for Carolina. Now, there is a third guy that is in that room that has reportedly emerged here this offseason and has had a little bit of success back in the spring and looks like he's going to be a contributor in this room this year after playing just 142 snaps a year ago on both defense and special teams combined. Jonathan Agamadu looks like he's going to play a bigger role this upcoming season. He finished with 10 total tackles last year. But by all indications, he took a nice step forward in the spring and looks like he's poised to hold the role that Mekhi Bayor did a year ago. And Mekhi Bayor is a guy that might have caught you off guard. You probably didn't think that he played that much last season. You thought it was a lot of Simpson and House. I mean, Mekhi Bayor played a lot more than you would think. And so I think Carolina is going to need that third linebacker this year. Agamadu, something that he has in common with Derek McDonald is that he was a guy that came out of the high school ranks as a former edge rusher. So maybe this is somebody that Carolina can deploy as a blitz option when they have him on the field at certain times. But you're hoping that he can build off of what he did in the spring and really show that he can be a part of the rotation, because Carolina can't be playing Payton Sealman and Derek McDonald 700+ snaps if they want to have success this season.
No, they cannot. And this is where I think, for me, the questions start to emerge in this room is who is going to be that third linebacker that emerges. Just so you first off, I mean, so you just have three guys that you can play and rotate, but if Sealman doesn't, then let's say Sealman doesn't make that transition, if this level just proves to be too much for him, do you have someone else in reserve that you can turn to and get production from? God forbid someone gets hurt. I think those are the two real reasons why after we get through Sealman and McDonald, I have questions just because as we'll make our way through, there's a lot of guys here with not a lot of production to begin with, and certainly not a lot of production with the Carolina uniform on. And so I think this is the first guy up, obviously. 6'2", 215 is Agamadu. So I think he's got the body, the frame that you want. But as you mentioned last year, just 10 total tackles across 142 snaps, and that was even with him playing snaps on special teams. So I think this will be probably the name to monitor the most if we hear him being talked about as we get into fall camp. That I think would be a positive. That okay, now there's 3 guys here that Stephen Belichick can count on. See that they can rely on. I know their base defense, they're going to be in a lot of 2 linebacker sets, and that's kind of the way that most teams play, especially in this modern day where you've got so many pass catchers out there. But you got to have at least 3 linebackers that you can play and rotate. And if he can emerge, if he can just become, even if he's just a third down linebacker, no matter what the role is, I think that spells good thing for Carolina's unit as a whole. Because if Sealman and McDonald find themselves in situations that Simpson and Kamori House found themselves in last year, where they're playing north of 700 snaps, then what happened to those 2 guys down the stretch can happen to these 2 guys, which means they won't be getting off blocks. They'll be getting run over. And those plays they were making in September, early October, they won't be playing in late November. They won't be making in late November. And as we saw, Carolina's defense, those final 3 games struggled. It wasn't a coincidence they lost all 3 of those games.
Yeah, I mean, and you've got to have a guy that, I mean, you look at Mekhi Beor last year, 252 snaps. Can you get somebody that can play that many snaps for you? Just to sort of take the pressure off of the guys that you're looking at with Kamori House and Andrew Simpson. I mean, those guys played over 700 snaps a year ago, and that's with a guy that's playing 250-something snaps at the position to go alongside of you. You've got to have somebody that can handle that. And so I think, Agamadu, I've probably got a little bit more confidence in him than you do, just based off of what I heard in the spring. I think the fact that he was a name that was popping up as somebody that Carolina was looking at. And really, when they talked about the linebackers, every time they talked about the trio that was really handling the load for Carolina. I think the thing is he's going to play. Somebody's going to have to, and I think he's probably the guy that has, the most experience, and also is the guy that is trusted most by the staff. The thing is he going to be able to put out the type of performances that Carolina needs him to put out when he's out there on the field? That's going to be the most important thing. You're going to need him to be, way ahead of where he was last year at this time. I mean, he had a couple of nice hits on special teams and everything like that, but you need him to be a reliable tackler, and you need him to just be a guy that can handle his own when he's on the field, even if it's just for, 10, 15 snaps per game. I mean, 700 snaps. Now that you look at it, though, that's probably what you're going to expect from Sealman and McDonald. It's just, can you get similar type of reps from Jonathan Agamadu as what you saw from that third linebacker spot a year ago? Because behind him, there really isn't much that you feel confident about going in. They were looking for that 4th linebacker, and no 4th linebacker emerged back in the spring. You had some guys that had moments. It looks like Jake Bauer was the guy that really had the most moments, the redshirt freshman. But really, you didn't see anybody that emerged to play significant reps or took significant reps for Carolina with the ones at any point during the spring, judging off of some of the reports. And so, that's one of the things that Carolina's really searching for going into this year. You've got 3, but can you find a 4th linebacker that you can really trust, that maybe then can actually start to limit the amount of snaps that the other guys are on the field, or at least if there is an injury or something like that, the drop-off isn't that significant back to what would then become the rotational linebacker in the group. Jake Bauer, as I mentioned, the guy that flashed the most, played just 33 snaps between defense and special teams a year ago. You're going to be hoping that he can provide much more than that this upcoming season. You'll do a mid-level 3-star coming out of the high school ranks that Carolina got late in last year's recruiting class. Was one of those ads that you just didn't know what he would ultimately become here in Chapel Hill, but was one of the better ones that Coach Belichick and his staff added late in that recruiting cycle. He's stuck around, and I think he's a guy that's going to have a chance to contribute this year. I think really right now it's between him and Tamir Hickman-Collins, who did play 60 snaps on defense last year, finished with 10 total tackles, but doesn't seem to have much buzz around him coming into fall camp.
Yeah, and this is, I think, one of the downsides about this schedule and just the way that it sets up. Like, you're entering the spring not having that fourth linebacker. Maybe that guy does emerge during fall camp, but if not, where's the chance for that to happen during the season? Because where's going to be the games where you think you can play some guys some different snaps or a heavier snap count because the game is over in the middle of the third quarter? You have one of those in the first month and a half of the year, in terms of where you think you'll be blowing out the opponent. And the better be the intention going into that game is, hey, let's put this game away early so we can really try to see what we got in some of these other guys. If you're getting blown out by Clemson, Miami, Notre Dame, whatever, I guess it could still maybe help you in the long run, but we won't feel as good about the depth you're building if you're down by 40 as opposed to being up by 40. So this could be another situation where, that Sunday Night Football thing maybe can emerge and they can maybe try to find some answers there because you're right. Outside of Bauer, you got, as you mentioned, Tamir Hickman-Collins, who, did play 60 snaps. He had 10 total tackles. Once you start going through the guys down there, now you're asking for a bunch of unknown, unproven talent to really try to make an impact on a room. And you can sometimes see it at the linebacker spot. But usually those guys are like NFL caliber dudes where they're playing more off of instinct and ability as opposed to being able to actually read, react, and make plays. So that's why, I guess I'm not as optimistic about this room top to bottom, is just because once you get through Agamadu, there's just not a whole lot of known here. And I don't know if there's going to be the potential to build some known, to figure out some answers at those depth linebacker spots as the season moves along. It kind of makes you wonder if that's why they maybe are targeting 2027. They look at that position group as maybe being really a year away from being 2 deep, let alone 3 deep. With that being said, we'll have to find out and see what these guys do have to offer. I think some continuity and the fact that these guys stay within the program obviously helps, gives you a leg up as you get into the fall, because how many of these guys maybe would have transferred in the spring if the spring portal still existed. But once you get past Jake Bauer, once you get past Tamir Hickman-Collins, man, yeah, it's a very bleak outlook from where I'm seeing in terms of expectations for these guys we still have to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, look, I would disagree with you there just because of the talent that's there for, a couple of the guys in this room that Carolina got in this recruiting class. I mean, you've got 2 4-star players from this past recruiting class at the linebacker position this year. And so that's where I think you're hoping that somebody emerges. Maybe Bauer, Hickman-Collins, maybe those are the guys that early in the season have to play those roles if you need someone to sub in for a snap or two, something like that. You're really hoping – what you're hoping is that, hey, Sealman, McDonald, Agamadu, those guys can really hold down the majority of the reps and stay healthy throughout the season. That's where you really start to worry, is when you get an injury. If you have an injury in this room, that's where the concern is really going to start to pick up, because then you're trusting guys that you just haven't seen it yet from. That haven't even played really significant special team snaps for you. I mean, yeah, 60 snaps on the defensive side of the ball isn't bad for a guy like Hickman Collins, but there's a reason why he wasn't mentioned and why Jake Bauer was the guy that was mentioned as that fourth linebacker back in the spring. Clearly, Hickman Collins has not shown what he's needed to show. And even if he does, he's probably a guy that has a pretty low ceiling, as opposed to guys like Calvin Thomas, DQ Forkpa. These are guys that Carolina, I think, is hoping are going to emerge as the season goes along. And Calvin Thomas, the one thing about him now, there are some people that, we were talking to at ACC Media Days who, have seen him, have been talking to his family and everything like that. And they said, there was the guys over at the Tar Pit podcast that told us that they've said he is much heavier than what they enlist him at on the official website. And I'm hoping that's actually the case, because I mean, you look and the size of a guy like Calvin Thomas, 6'3", he's got the length and that you want at the position. He's only 207 pounds, according to GoHeels.com. And so hopefully he has put on a lot more weight since he's gotten to campus, and that number is going to look a lot different for him. I mean, if you could even get him into that range where you've got, Agamadu, 6'2", 220, Tamir Hickman Collins, 6'2", 215. If you get him to 215 pounds, then maybe that is a guy that you can ultimately play out there. But 207 might be a guy that ultimately gets pushed around a little bit. So hopefully he has put that weight on. DQ Forkpa is a guy that's built a little bit more like you're looking for him to be built, 6'1", 226 pounds. But the thing about him is that the stats aren't mind-blowing from him at the high school level. I mean, you go back, his most successful season at the linebacker position was back in 2023, where he had 34 total tackles, 9 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, 7 quarterback hurries. That's what you're looking for from the position. Played out of position last year, played edge rusher for St. Francis Academy up there in Baltimore, Maryland. Had an opportunity to go to a bigger school, took it. Probably got him more recognized, got him recruited a little bit heavier. And so now he's having to make that transition back to playing the linebacker position. We'll see how quickly he's able to do that. I have higher hopes for Calvin Thomas. I do, just out of the two of them. I think he's a guy, you look at his senior year of high school, 53 total tackles, 14.5 tackles for loss, 8.5 sacks, an interception, and 4 pass deflections. I think he's a much more flexible player, a much more complete linebacker just at this point. And so I would say going into the year, if one of these two guys is going to emerge, especially if he has put on the weight, then I think it is going to be Calvin Thomas. And that could be a guy that gives you a little bit of hope that if there is an injury late in the season, he could get out there and produce something.
I just wish someone would talk about my weight game in a positive way, like we were talking about with Calvin Thomas, because I wish I weighed closer to the 2000 or the 207 pounds, not 2007. I wish I weighed closer to 207 as opposed to where we want him to be at, which is where I'm closer to back than that 220, that 225 range. These two guys, I think, are obviously the future of the room. I think, you handle all of the recruiting, but these were the two names that it felt like I would be hearing talked about the most, fans were interested in the most. And those seem to be like two pretty big commitments back when Carolina put together their rather large recruiting class of north of 40 commits last January. So with that being said, I don't know how much to expect for them for this year, but I do think, I think these are two guys that Belichick is counting on. These guys sticking around and they can build up through their system. And by 2027, maybe by 2028, because you mentioned just their ability and the talent, maybe that's ready to really shine on the field, and they can be the two guys that we're talking about when we're previewing that year's season, like we did tonight with Sealman and McDonald. Forkpa, the best thing I like about him is the fact that he's listed at 6'1", 226. So he's already got the body, already got the frame, like you want to see. It's just with Calvin Thomas, how much bigger has he gotten, and can he be able to maintain that weight throughout the season, be able to play at that weight throughout the season? I would hope to think we get to see glimpses of these guys at different points during the year. I would just probably say these are two guys we'll be talking about in a much more larger capacity in 2027, the year we know that Belichick internally is targeting for the program to really be competitive, I think, at the conference level and maybe more nationwide.
Yeah, and I mean, especially if you get a good year from Sealman, a productive year in the role that he's in from Jonathan Agamadu, and then Calvin Thomas and DQ Forkpa can emerge. I mean, then you're talking about some really good depth at this position going into next year. And so even if they can emerge, late in the season and be, contributors in even in a minimal amount, I think that would be great for Carolina. Look, the opportunity is going to be in front of these guys when they get into fall camp. That's the thing about this position, is that after Agamadu, don't feel like anybody else has really proven enough to where if somebody shines in fall camp, they're still going to be ahead of them on the depth chart. And so I would think that, hey, if Calvin Thomas really is up to 225, 235 pounds, somewhere in that range, as Tar Pit 9 is talking to us about on the in the comment section, then yeah, maybe he is a guy that really shows out in fall camp, and all of a sudden, hey, he's that fourth linebacker coming into the season and actually gets a chance to play a little bit for Carolina early in the year. We'll just have to wait and see ultimately from that group. Then you have some of the guys that are deeper depth on the roster. You got Tyler Hauser and Lance Pascal, who are guys that were redshirt freshmen or are redshirt freshmen, were on the roster a year ago. Still, this is one guy that I'm going to hold out hope for that he can emerge here at some point is Tyler Hauser. I mean, you look back at his high school career at a pretty decent school out of the state of New Jersey. This was a guy that had 341 tackles, 45 tackles for loss, and 13 and a half sacks in his high school career. I still believe that there is a good player in there. It's just, does he emerge this year, or is this a guy that is going to take a little bit of time down the line? Lance Pascal played for a really, really talented program down in the state of Florida at St. Thomas Aquinas. So that certainly is somebody that, coming from that pedigree of a program, should at some point be able to show you something, you would hope. 144 tackles, 14 tackles for loss, 6 sacks, and 8 quarterback hurries in his 2 years at St. Thomas Aquinas. Didn't play a single snap as a freshman last year. Same thing with Hauser. So those guys are going to be looking just to even earn some special teams reps, I think would be a step in the right direction for those guys this season. And the guys that will be battling them to get some of those special teams reps in their first year with the program. Both of these guys, true freshmen that were with the program back in the spring, I believe. Maybe not on Avenger, but he might be a guy that's coming in. But I know Jaden Griffin-Haynes was with the team back in the spring. Griffin-Haynes, the brother of Zavian Griffin-Haynes, the defensive lineman. That's a true freshman as well. He had a junior season, didn't get his senior year stats. They were a little light for me to believe they were his senior year stats unless he got injured. So his junior year stats, 107 total tackles, 6 sacks, 10 quarterback hurries, an interception, and 5 pass breakups. So certainly a name that's very intriguing, even though he was just a guy that it felt like, Carolina added alongside of Zavian as well. I think that's how most people looked at it. Could be a guy that could contribute for Carolina somewhere down the line. Jordan Avenger, 38 total tackles and an interception in 7 games as a senior, 50 total tackles, 6 tackles for loss, and a forced fumble in his best season, 9 games as a junior. So those are the names in that linebacker room for this upcoming season. I think it's safe to say, though, that they will be leaning heavily on Payton Sealman and Derek McDonald hitting on what they thought they were getting out of the transfer portal. If those guys hit, then Carolina could have a successful season at the linebacker position. If they don't, then Carolina will certainly be looking for some of the younger guys in that room to emerge and help them out and become the future of that room sooner rather than later. We got the in-depth position previews on the website for you guys. Linebacker will be going up here shortly after I'm finished getting the audio edition of the podcast up. So make sure that you guys are keeping an eye out for that. Reason you want to read that, got the projected depth chart for this upcoming season for you guys. So make sure you go over and check that out right after we're done with this edition of the podcast. You could check it out for all the other positions as well that we have discussed: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, offensive line, and defensive line. We encourage you to go back and check all those out. And then any other news that comes out around the football program here over these next handful of days, we'll also have some articles around the opening to fall camp for you guys as well. So to make sure that you're keeping an eye out, heeltupblog.com for all that coverage. Also, article that I just put up last night, 30 former Tar Heels are going into the NFL preseason on 90-man rosters. So we tell you about the chances that those players have to make the rosters. We got guys that are locks. We got guys that are on the roster bubble, guys that we think are likely cut. All of those that you can check out there on the website. Really cool article that I was able to put together, and it's our opinions on or my opinion ultimately on what ends up happening. So make sure you go over there and check that out at heeltupblog.com. On the basketball side of things, did have a recent addition to the staff, Jorge Sanz, that Carolina gets from Gonzaga. So go back and read a little bit about him over there on the website. And then any other news around the program that we get, we will be bringing to you on there at heeltupblog.com. Meanwhile, on the podcast side of things, we've been going through the position previews for you guys. You can go back, check out the ACC, AC kickoff recap edition of the podcast as well, where we react to some of the best sound from ACC kickoff. So make sure you guys go back and check out those previous editions of the podcast, especially those position previews, so that you can get caught up and get ready to go for this upcoming season with our opinions on what each one of these rooms look like. On the basketball side of things, just did a podcast tonight talking about the hire of Sanz, as well as the latest on Seyon Keita and Alexandros Samodurov. So make sure that you guys go over to the website and check that out, or go over to YouTube and check that out. And while you're there, make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube page. That is something that we're pushing, trying to get up to 1,000 subscribers before football season. We can only do it with your help. So make sure when you're over there, you do give us a subscription. We would greatly appreciate that. Also, follow us on social media at HeelToughBlog. That is a direct line to our to all of our content, whether it's on Twitter or on Facebook. It's at HeelToughBlog on both of those sites, and it's just our content that's up there for you guys to check out. But that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the podcast. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.